way the plan is to do it on a priority basis. So as we move forward, when a project is coming up, we would then come before the city council with the bond ordinance to fund that plan.
See, one of the problems we have is if we bond any of the projects that still remain from the FY '08 budget before July 1st, the debt service immediately starts in our upcoming budget year, which is something we just can't afford to do. So we won't bond the remaining projects until after July 1st. And then on the proposed budget list, capital project list rather, for the following year, the fiscal year '09 budget, there probably will be projects that we're going to want to fund just because they're absolutely essential. And we can do that after July 1st. We'll come before the city council once the plan's been approved. And that will now incur debt service in the following fiscal year, but it will not in the fiscal year for which this budget is being proposed. So we're going to kind of pick and choose out of whatever, if you approve the capital plan for next year, we'll pick and choose those that are become essential elements for next year. And a lot of what we've already been approved for but haven't bonded, we're going to come to you with some bonding ordinances over the course of the next fiscal year also, but not before January 1st. I'm sorry, July 1st.
That would include the certs too.
Well, the certs is dictated by the city council approving the list of settlements and final court approval of the settlement case before we come to the bond. That could be 3 to 4 month period, into next year.
And otherwise, we would have to pay those certs out of next year's budget. So by waiting until July 1st and then bonding them, it puts off the beginning of payments for that for another year, and it leaves us whole for the upcoming year's budget.
Did you also go through the cost of borrowing for operating funds when the fund balance gets as low as it was last year and as low as it's projected for this year?
Well, because of the fact that we will have significantly low fund balance, that caused us to borrow more money. 2 years ago, we borrowed $30 million. This year, we have to borrow $70 million. Next year, we're projecting it could be as high as $100 million to keep actual cash borrowing during the year.
During what periods of time?
Well, it depends when we do a cash flow analysis, when the Board of Ed gets their money, when we get our money, and depending on low points during the year. Usually it starts, there's a low point in December, and then there's also a low point in February. And those are the two points of time that we will borrow money.
So the December borrowing is until people pay their taxes in January.
Right.
And the February borrowing, how long is that for?
That's basically to the end of the year. We do get a lot of our money in June. So basically, that's when we have the grant coming due and revenue anticipation don't come due and payment. So usually February we borrow for the complete thing until the end of the year.
When does the state give us the money?
Well, June. A lot of the money comes in June. There's now two periods of time. We get a lot of money in March and a lot of money in June. I think the Board of Ed is basically on the same type of schedule.
Can we go back to the slide before that showed the shortfall and tell me how you got to the 18 million?
Sure.
That one here.
Sure. As you know, we started with an $85 million budget gap, and we asked New York State to fund 50 of it, and we were going to fund 35 of it. When New York State came down with theirs, they came down with $39.7 million. Now, we still had to figure out a way to fund our 35. And that $18.4 million gap is what New York State did not fund, plus what we hadn't funded out of the 35 million. So it's a combination of both. That's not an $18.4 million gap created by New York State not funding. Their portion, as you can see, was just $10.3 million. And then we absorbed the rest on our side. We then increased our funding gap by making an $8 million contribution to the Board of Education's budget. So ours went up from, a smaller portion of that, which was about 6.9 million, up to about 15 million. And that's what we had to absorb through certiorari's, through an increase in the taxes over what we had originally planned on, increasing our taxes by using some of our reserve, our funding reserve, and that was the 9.9 million, of which we're using 5.1. That's how we then eliminated the $18.4 million gap, so that we now we're able to fund this budget rather without any cuts.
As you know, we all had a 24% county tax hike in Yonkers, and no small part of that was played by the student utilization rates. We already had, I think, $5 million in commercial certiorari payments this
Right.
year. Is it not time to, I don't know how many decades it's been since we had our properties evaluated?
1954.
Petition the county, I mean, from what I understand, it's got to be, it should be done in the county, in the county process to make it, to have parity among municipalities, but should that be something
I
that should be
agree.
looked out? We
I
can't
do.
keep spending these certain monies, and most people that have the availability to file these petitions are, well, probably well-to-do businesses. The average person probably doesn't have the resources to mount a decades-long cert case.
Yeah, I'm glad you
and-
brought that up, Councilwoman. One of the problems, as you know, we've been, when the almost 24% increase in Yonkers portion of the county taxes was announced, the explanation for it was that the city of Yonkers has not had a revaluation in over 50 years. That's partially true. That's not wholly true. If we go back and do a full reassessment, as, by the way, I think we should do, it will still keep us at a significant disadvantage unless the rest of the county also does that. Because we will not be using the same base, and therefore we will not be compared the same way as the rest of the cities around the county. So yeah, I do think that it's time for a full reassessment countywide, which will then not only obviously balance within our own city the appropriate distribution of taxes and tax burden, but do the same thing countywide, so that we don't fall prey to the same thing that happened this year. Even though we're doing things properly within our own city, we're still at a disadvantage when it comes to the rest of the county. I agree. Yes.
Could you go through how the Ridge Hill funding that we got last year, this year, before it opens, you know, that 10 million is what the payment we're getting from the Ridge Hill Development Corp?
Right, as you know, when the city council finally approved the Ridge Hill project, what they did was they got a $10.5 million revenue source for the 3 years before the project was expected to open. We used the entire $10.5 million last year as a single source to balance our budget. In addition, between Ridge Hill finally now selling its lease or buying the lease out, Ridge Hill, the Ratner Corporation's local development corporation, buy out the remaining lease from the Ridge Hill Development Corporation. After they paid off their bills, there was an additional $8 million, which they then turned over to the city. We used that. It was available last year, but it wasn't used. We're using it this year. So that $8 million was already figured into our revenues before the $85 million gap. And by the way, something you should know also, last year we got a single